Ja, jetzt sind alle drin. Hallo zusammen. Schön, dass sehr viele von euch da sind in unserer letzten Folge aus diesem Jahr. Mein Name ist Rasvan Munteanu. Ich werde euch kurz die technischen Sachen mit euch durchgehen auf Deutsch. Dann gebe ich weiter an meinen Kollegen Markus, der dann das Ganze dann auf Englisch modelliert. Eure Mikrofone sind erstmal stumm geschaltet. Wir werden sie freischalten und ihr könnt während der Coach-Klinik könnt ihr Fragen stellen. Also einfach uns schreiben im Chat, welche Fragen ihr habt und wir würden euch dann freischalten, dann könnt ihr sie stellen. Bitte, wenn Videos dran sind, dass ihr eure Kamera ausmacht, damit ihr die Chance habt, es besser zu sehen. Die Coach-Klinik wird aufgenommen, ihr werdet aber nicht zu sehen sein, sondern nur der Moderator und derjenige, der moderiert. So, das war der langweilige Part. Ich gebe einfach weiter an Markus. Markus.
Ja, danke Razvan und hallo auch von meiner Seite. Hi Will, we'll switch to English now so you can actually understand what we're talking about. I'm very excited and pleased to have you on board our online coach clinic. Just so everyone gets to know you, I thought we maybe share some stories at the start and then we'll kick off.
If I could first, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be a part of this coaching series, and I'm a little resentful that I didn't get the memo to consume all the great information that you guys have shared up to this point. So I hope that I'll get the invite now that my time zones are better aligned with Deutschland, so that I can be ready and grow in the ways that you have over the last couple of months.
And we're happy to share, and also we've got it all sort of stored on the web page, so I can send you all the resources.
Excellent.
And do all your homework. For everyone, maybe just as an intro, and Will, for your information, we have a big mix of coaches with us today, from coaches that work full-time in pro sports or even in junior sports. We've got a great system here in Germany where there's a lot of youth coaches that get to do their job full-time. And there's a lot of coaches that are also have youth teams and work with them maybe twice a week, 3 times a week for a short period of time. And so we've got a big mix of people and backgrounds. And you've obviously got your experience in the pro leagues and from your work with the national team in Australia. But my hope is for everyone, just as an intro, that regardless of our backgrounds, that we can all learn some or get some ideas and learn some principles that we can take home and use at home, regardless of the resources or the backgrounds that we have. I think, Will, you'd agree with that?
Without a doubt.
Cool. I'll just share my screen so we can, hopefully everyone can see these pictures that I quickly just pasted into PowerPoint. I thought they show a bit of a mix of emotions that you're showing there and body language. Maybe you can just we'll start with the picture at the bottom because that was sort of chronologically where you were in the last couple of years, was with the Nets, with the Long Island Nets. Can you tell us a bit sort of what was your role there and what was the aim with the program?
I have had the good fortune of working for now 3 different NBA teams, and I started my pro coaching career after coaching in high school and college with the Philadelphia 76ers. The head coach, Brett Brown, had been the head coach of Australia's national team previously, and so that's how I was introduced to international basketball. Despite being a fan for many years, that was the way I met Andre Lamanis and Marcus and the other great coaches in Australia. And after I finished my time in Philadelphia, where I worked sort of hand in hand with Brett to build a program from scratch, really, like a complete and total from the bottom up program build, I had the opportunity to work with the Brooklyn Nets, who were in a similar circumstance, but taking a different approach in the way that, new head coach, new GM, the first time they've been serving in those roles in their careers. And so I spent 2 years doing similar things to what I did in Philly, but the third year I had the opportunity to be the head coach of our G League team, the Long Island Nets. And so that's the picture that you see here. I think every G League's team's goal is to collaborate and connect on a number of fronts with the parent club. But I believe that Brooklyn and Long Island has and is continue to be one of the best at creating that sort of synergy that others are trying to find. And the way that that played out was by finding the types of people on the playing group and on the coaching staff that were aligned with the kind of cultural markers that we believed in for our basketball program. So you'll see many G League programs that look at it as a place for low risk, high reward kinds of placements, players that are very young, very raw, maybe have questions about the spirit that they bring into a team. And in the case of Long Island Nets, this team was built largely by trying to find winners, players that had outperformed their expectations for years and years, and that were going to create an environment for players like John and Musa, Theo Pinson, Nick Claxton, who's with them now, the two-ways, the 14th, 15th guys on the Brooklyn roster, to go to play against, to learn from, and to develop. And I suppose that's a big theme of what I've learned from the places I've been, is that development is more than just the shooting drills you have or the practices you take. And so I think this picture is emblematic of the good fortune I had as a first-time head coach of a pro team to be coaching players that in a timeout in a league that is oftentimes about individual accolades and trying to get somewhere else, given that they're on very little salary compared to most pro leagues around the world. You see the entire roster huddled around their first year head coach and listening intently and focused on performing. And that wasn't taken for granted by me, and it wasn't an accident how that happened, because of the way the team was put together and the quality of the human beings that are in that picture.
Great, thanks. You had the same challenge then in Sydney. The two pictures are above from your time with the Sydney Kings. And I chose these two pictures because it shows you interacting with the athletes. Xavier Cooks, who was spent a season here in Germany, in Bavaria as well, in Würzburg. So the Würzburg coaches should recognize his face. And then you've got Andrew Bogut there on the right side. How important is it, or sort of what is your experience working with these kind of athletes and building that environment that you mentioned for developing players?
I look at it as perhaps my approach is somewhat different in that I try not to approach it differently than the relationships I have throughout my life. And so I love being part of a team. That's sort of an organizing principle in my life. And my wife and my family and my colleagues, I look at all of those people as teammates. And despite me having a role as a head coach or an assistant coach or a special assistant or whatever it is they're calling me, I believe it's where I find joy, and what I think I'm good at is trying to help and particularly solve the puzzles that are presented in a season with a team in a player's career. So I was humbled to have my style called conspiratorial by Luke Longley, one of my colleagues. And I thought that was fitting. Like, I really am excited to get to the heart of what people are trying to achieve in their lives and learn from that. I'm very curious about other people's point of view, and maybe in part because I wasn't a great player myself, I don't project any sense of knowing that what they're going through, or trying to trick myself into thinking that I have had the feeling that they are feeling right now in a practice, in a game. And so I approach those moments by trying to either learn who they are and what they're after and how I can help, or by helping reinforce the sort of mutually agreed upon ways that we've developed as a team of two, me and Xavier, me and Andrew, me and whoever, to fill my role, which is sometimes, very often, it's just to hold a mirror up to reality of what's going on.
Great, thanks a lot. I think that'll give everyone a brief overview of your thoughts so far, and I'll pass it on to you to share your thoughts on player development. And again, the reminder for everyone, if you guys have questions, just let us know, and we're happy to take questions during the presentation as well.
Certainly. And I think that my hope is that we can make it as conversational as you guys would like to. So I know we have a lot of coaches in the chat, but Marcus, please hold me to, if we have good questions and people have an area where this can veer off course, nothing would make me happier. But in trying to come up with a conversation piece and a conversation starter, player development is in quotes here because it has become obviously a cliche in some ways, but the spirit of it, I think, is righteous, and one that I really enjoy trying to think through all the different facets and all the different avenues that exist for a coach to help a player develop. And I'll say that I've had the chance to see it play out in different paradigms across the world, in college, in the national team, for NBA teams that are trying to win right away, for NBA teams that are trying to grow with a younger cohort of players and build over time. But for me, the maybe most important part of it is the degree to which in any of those environments, the benefits you get from focusing on and really identifying the degree to which your incentives as the coach are aligned with the incentives of the people you're working with. Because I think too often the sort of traditional form of coaching oftentimes looks like, listen to me tell you how to play basketball, how to perform well. And that's a paradigm I just reject for a bunch of reasons. Maybe the most important part of that, of why that doesn't resonate with me, is that it doesn't seek to try to understand and frame the relationship in a way where I'm here to serve you and I'm here to help you perform. And by the way, that's selfishness is a part of why I'm doing that. Like I want you to perform because that is good for me. And just identifying that at the onset of a relationship, I think helps build trust. It washes away some of the myth around teams and coaches and helps you get through some of the things that make it harder to trust, so that you can get to a place where once that trust is built, you have the opportunity to actually follow through, and that every member of the team is feeling like they're growing while also participating and doing things that are in the service of the team and best interest of the team. And once that's achieved, once you sort of set that up, I feel like you can have results that are and not or. And so in the case of development, I think the maybe most important part of this is the degree to which it's not just your skill level. And we don't stop player development because we're in the playoffs. We don't think about phases of the season or players on the team based on how many minutes they're playing as, oh, he's trying to get better and he's not, or we're investing time in what this athlete is doing because he's more important or paid more. And we're also not crazy enough to think that there isn't a hierarchy in pro sport and that everyone's circumstance is going to be the same. So we try to bring a holistic approach, and the best approaches I've seen achieve this, in that both for your body, your mind, and your spirit throughout the year, we're trying to bring things that have evidence behind them, and we're trying to collaborate with you, but we're also expecting you to collaborate with the broader superstructure of our organization. And we're going to be demanding that of ourselves, so that sports science, analytics, scouting, strength and conditioning, all of these things are going to grow into a layer of armor for you, that you're going to feel healthy and strong and confident, and that if at any point you feel like that isn't being achieved, it's incumbent upon you to say so. And in the same way, once we agree that this is focused on your career, and as long as we behave in a way that isn't sacrificing your future for your now because we're desperate to win tomorrow, then we can honestly look at each other and say, I don't believe you showing up 3 minutes late to this treatment session is in keeping with how we've agreed you're going to be best served to fill your role for this team and to grow as a player. And by the way, the same goes to the coach or the therapist or anyone that's interacting with the athlete. On the physical side of things, I've seen a great deal of success focused on career best fitness. Brett Brown used that as a guiding theme every season, is that your goal is to come in to the beginning of the season in a career best shape. And one clever way he did that was by intimidating the players about how fast we were going to play. Boys, you just won't believe it. You're so gifted. You're such an amazing athlete. You're so fast. We're just going to unleash you in all different kinds of ways. I just hope you're up to it. I just hope that, by day 5, you're not falling off. And because I've seen you run, I've seen you do all these amazing things. And I don't know you've ever run like this, but I'm really excited to see how it plays out. He was such a gifted communicator and found ways to motivate and also communicate that the expectations were going to be very high. He felt in particular like it was important to feel like you've earned the right to play well. And a big part of that had to do with your body. And so more often than not, the kinds of things you'd see him talk to players about was, how do you feel? You look great. You look sleepy. What's going on? Because he knows that this sport at its highest level is an incredibly taxing game. And the marathon of an NBA season or of an Olympic campaign is very much about consistency, and consistency can only be achieved through habits. And that was really the rallying cry of Kenny Atkinson, the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets when I worked there, who believed that you're a sum of your habits, and that maybe Kenny might be the most evidence-based coach I've ever worked with. He was up to speed on the decision fatigue and the degree to which you're tricking yourself if you think you're going to be able to bring willpower into play at night after a game, and I'll decide not to eat ice cream tonight at 10:30 p.m. But if your habit after a game is, I recover, I eat at the facility, I read a book for 30 minutes, and then I go to sleep, and I have hygiene around that sleep, then that's just what you do. And those kinds of things over time build into edges that multiply and reinforce each other. Longevity really sat at the heart of both of what those guys were preaching. And they had both worked on a personal basis with some of the game's greatest players. So there was a level of believability to what they said when they were able to talk about Tim Duncan, when they were able to talk about Al Horford and these other players that have had incredibly long, successful, productive careers. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the ways the player needs to feel like you care about them to some degree, or you need to acknowledge that you don't care about them, and that has to just be an upfront part of it, and that it's more transactional. But I believe these coaches had success, and I believe whatever success I've had is largely due to the fact that I don't take a transactional approach into the relationship with the athletes. So Kenny, I thought, had 2 really clever ways to have these kinds of concepts play out in the training sessions. And that was that defense was going to be a part of every workout. And that although we had quite a bit of 1-on-0 training vitamins, we called them, very Spurs term, stolen from Coach Popovich a long time ago. Inside of those, we still were going to touch defense every time. And that brought a level of physicality, fitness, and a mentality to our workout that I thought were really helpful. And then when things were low energy, because inevitably they will become that at some stage, one-on-one became the default. It's like, cool, you're not bringing the juice right now. Great, let's just play. And Kenny would actually play against them from time to time, or he'd have a cast of exceptionally good former players that worked on our staff, Mike Batiste and Ronnie Burrell and a number of other guys that could get out there and play with them. And so those are things that I think were clever hacks, if you want to look at them that way, that I've used in my own career to great effect. In terms of those habits, here's some shots from our Sydney Kings program. And that was really an effort by me to try to bring an NBA quality development program into the Australian League. And I was so lucky to have a staff that was willing to try to achieve this, given that the typical NBA team has 30 to 50 basketball operations employees. And on our side of things, really, we were at about 7. So what we were able to bring in from a mindset standpoint, I think was as important as any of the individual systems that we put into place. And that's just that, like, we have really high expectations. And that is, in my view, fundamental to being able to achieve things. And that meant that the amount of time we were going to be on court was going to look different and be substantially less than what they were used to in previous seasons. But the amount that we expected them to put into their craft, their physical preparation, their mental preparation, was going to be appreciably more than what they were used to. And on balance, we were going to get more of their time. But the way we made it clear that that was important and why they should buy into that was that it was focused on them performing. And so we had weekly Pilates. We worked out and trained in ways and environments with loud music and very competing included even inside of our mobility and lower body strength training, as you can see in this video on the left. And in trying to help them understand what ways we had seen be successful, we tried to capture the habits that each athlete was using and tried to present those back to them as sort of a menu for them to identify, look, what are the habits and when are the habits going to serve me best? And we made these all for their fridge to place at home so that if they were thinking about what it is that they needed to do, and some of our young athletes, Didi Uzada, for instance, who was stashed with us by the Pelicans, the 35th pick from last year's draft, a Brazilian player, relatively young, coming to a new country in a new apartment with new friends. This was a chance for him to think about, what is my routine going to look like for the next 15 years? And how is that routine going to match up to my dreams, which are big and are going to require me growing a lot in ways that I probably can't even anticipate yet. This was an effort to try to move him and move even our older players further down the curve from wherever they were when we got there. More shots to just give you a sense of what that preparation looked like. We built a kitchen in our locker room space. We took money out of the budget to make sure that these guys had fresh fruit, fresh veg, good nutritious options immediately upon arriving and departing our arena. Partnered with a meal service company that had food for athletes. And the shot you see on the top right is a session that we would hold periodically in terms of education. This is our nutritionist working with our athletes. We didn't have very many team film sessions, but when we gathered as a team, we were trying to do it in times where that format suited them. And that was where we were all going to be on the same page. We tried to make it as interactive as possible, unlike this lecture, which I hope will be broken up soon by your remarkably incisive questions. And as I've moved on in my coaching career, the less value I find in lecture style work of any kind. And so we can talk more, but this was unusual for them to gather around the projector and listen to someone talk to them. And because of that, I think when we did it, it showed a level of importance and carried a level of weight that helped them appreciate that we thought this was something that was going to really benefit them and us. Just in terms of the integration, this is one of our assistant coaches working with a player who is returning from injury, a quite serious injury. Kevin Lish is the player in the video, and he was a former MVP of the Australian League, a 10-year pro, multiple championship winner. The coach that's working with him was not used to the kinds of superstructure that we created to support our athletes, and was required to engage with our performance director, our physiotherapist, and really embraced it in ways that I thought were innovative, and bring work that they were doing for his return to play to full health for many, many months, to not only connect with him and get him work that's relevant and good for that return, but also to make it clear to the player that, like, we're on this. Like, I'm working with your therapist, your strength coach is working with me, the head coach knows where you're at in this process, and to whatever degree possible, getting you onto a court where you love to be and trying to bring more of that work in and around the court, even if it's during our practices, so whether you're visible to the other players and they're visible to you, I feel like is a really powerful symbol that we've been able to leverage.
Well, we've got our first question.
Lovely.
From Rabia. Razvan, can you get her mic to work? And then
Should be now on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Perfect. Thank you for being here. It's really awesome.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I have a question in regards to the healthy lifestyle that you're teaching your players. So I'm wondering, how do you teach the players the healthy lifestyle in regards to the diet? Because this is really an important part of being a professional sportswoman. Is it only through classes with the teacher, or do they really get cooking classes? Because I mean, if they're alone or in their apartments or houses, they have to know how they can prep a meal. And how do you make sure they stick to the plans, not only in regards to the diet, but also recovery, etc., when they are outside of the gym?
That's a wonderful question. And I think increasingly the degree to which we can create those edges with our athletes and create, I think of them as like, excuse me, feedback loops where the athlete is trying something and seeing success and getting reinforcement and is willing to try it again and keep that kind of thing going. I think of that sort of power law relationship that exists when you're able to achieve that. And that's a bit of my sales job to our ownership, to make the kinds of commitments that we did in the nutrition space, hiring a full-time nutrition or a nutritionist that worked with us regularly, the same person all the time, stocking our fridge, building out a kitchen in our space. That all reflected how important we thought it was. And I believe that spaces oftentimes make environments. And so the fact that our players were coming in and having that as a part of their routine had a better chance of anchoring itself inside of what they thought of as normal, and that they were going to see benefits of that over time. And those benefits, maybe they didn't see it in themselves. Maybe those that players were less diligent, they saw their teammates benefit, and they saw their more veteran teammates who have to care more about their bodies because of the stage of their career. They saw how powerful that was. And as always, I think if I had to just pick one thing that might have the highest return on getting someone to change what they do, it's seeing someone that they respect or believe in for some reason, that has believability, benefit from it. And having the veterans that we had in Long Island and in Sydney and here in Houston, like that is extremely powerful for young players. But it's also powerful for you to see your peers and their approach. I'm a better reader because of Marcus. Like he has influenced me in the way that he educates himself over time. And I think we're crazy if we don't think about how the random bumping into interactions that happen in a locker room with players, with staff, the kind of people that your staff are, and the way that, what are their habits like? I think that has real power as it reflects to a team. And to your idea about cooking classes, that was something the Long Island had in place before I got there. And I thought it was remarkably powerful. We had a grocery shopping trip as a team, and we divided up into groups, and we had a game that was played to find certain items in the store, and meal plans that were created. But maybe the most powerful part of our nutrition program on Long Island was the fact that I recruited an Australian named Mitch Creek to come join us. And I joked that in the G League, I had 10 G Leaguers and one Mitch Creek, one Australian. And part of the reason I wanted to go coach in Australia is I was going to have one G Leaguer and 10 Mitch Creeks. But I think even among Australians, Mitch is at the far end of the spectrum in how diligent he is about his body in particular, and his craft and his approach. And so John and Musa, as a 19-year-old Bosnian living in America for the first time, there's no doubt he learned lessons from how Mitch Creek takes care of himself. And I think that that will always be more powerful than some skinny gray-haired goofball coach telling them that they need to eat more fruit and veggies. Cool. In terms of schedule, this is a sample of last season's schedule. You can see this is heading into the playoffs. Over the course of COVID, we all had a chance to reflect back. This schedule changed a lot during the off season in ways that I think are powerful, but I think you could sort of see a commitment to, I hope you see a commitment to the physical aspect we've talked about so far. The fact that even in the playoffs, we're staying to our recovery, we're staying to our weekly Pilates. That came about as a result of one of our players having a severe imbalance physically, and it leading to a lot of injuries for him. And so we instituted this in part because some of the older players liked it, and in part because one of these young players really needed to have this kind of training that was mostly focused on injury prevention and not as much Olympic lifting for him. So the vitamins that you see here, those in my preseason with the Kings before I came to join the Rockets, we moved away entirely from one person vitamins, just the evidence around the lack of variability in those training environments and the opportunities we were missing to have players compete against each other, contest each other's shooting, create more randomness in everything we were doing. We felt like that was a structure that we needed to adjust over time. So we moved to making the default be 2 or 3 person groups for those vitamin sessions. And then the shooting blocks, similarly, we worked with each athlete to try to help them move further down the curve to understand what desirable difficulties they could institute, and we could help them institute inside of their training so that there was more spaced practice, that the practice was more variable, that it was interleaved with other work that they were doing. And that was not something we were ready for in our first season. But over the course of that year, as we grew to understand where our players were at and they grew to trust the structures that we were putting into place, I was proud to feel like when I left Sydney and they're iterating on it and growing in ways better than I would have thought of now, that there was a real modern development approach going on with our athletes around training. So that speaks to, I guess, something that I think of as kind of the underpinning of most of the work we do, which is why we're coaches, because we think things you work on, you can grow. And whether it's learning information or motor skills, you can learn anything you want to. You can grow in any area you want to. And that's not often the mindset that many athletes have, in part because they've been so, they've been in that 99th percentile in a bunch of ways their whole life. And so it's very easy for that to, if you're in the far end of the spectrum on one end or far end of the spectrum on the other end, it's easy to believe that that's just how I am. And so fighting to make sure that they were educated about this and what we were doing on a daily basis was reinforcing this idea is a hugely important part of our approach and what I've seen work. And I think, getting what you reward, Charlie Munger has great quotes about not getting confused about anything mattering more than incentives. And so if you're incentivizing players in ways that aren't aligned with what you're hoping to achieve, then you do so at your own peril. And I think you have a significant amount of drag on your program. So Carol Dweck, one of the pioneers of research in mindset, talks about the way that how you communicate conveys that what you value. And so if you don't spend very little time with players that are not in the rotation or playing less minutes, or you have structures that suggest these things, not only are they being reinforced that they don't matter based on the minutes, they're also having these messages reinforced in the way that you're communicating when you do communicate. And that, I think, is toxic for teams and should be fought against actively, because it's tempting. And I think there's a great deal of inertia with the way teams have existed. And anyone that had a negative experience in this way will immediately connect back to it once one of these patterns starts to emerge. And so trying to be active in the way that the coaches and the staff and the teammates are holding each other to that standard is very important to me. So
we'll go to the question.
Yes, sir.
Just to bump in from Matthias. Matthias, can you hear us?
Nothing's coming through, Coach.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yep.
Yes, okay. Hello, Will. Also from me, thank you very much for taking this time. It's really a pleasure.
It's an honor.
My question is, how do you deal with different learning speeds? Obviously, when you have a whole team of players, you have some players who pick up things really quick, be it a tactical aspect, be it a technical aspect, and you have some players who just by nature take longer. How do you approach this so that you can take everybody along, but don't hold up certain players to the extent that they are basically bored by the training because you have to repeat it so much?
I am grateful for this question, and your check is in the mail. Thank you for letting me talk about that. That is probably the thing that I am most interested in and have spent the most time on over the last 3 years. And if I could zoom it out even further, it's just, to what degree can we add rigor and improve our abilities to teach separate from the content? What are the ways that we can actually encourage and become learning facilitators instead of teachers? Because if they're not understanding it, that is a reflection of us not doing our jobs, in my view. And so where I've landed is not a final resting place, but I believe that the goal is for everyone to grow, and the rates of that are going to be different for a number of reasons. The way that you understand where people are at, I think, requires some sort of baseline testing, and that feels like school, which is challenging in my experience. But I think to try to understand, if you can break it up and focus and make it seem less boring and more relevant to their success, the beginning of anything is understanding, where are we at? What is your understanding? What is your familiarity? Do you understand the terminology that we're using? Do you understand the concepts that we are trying to employ to be a good basketball team? And I think your question made me really think about veteran players who have seen every pick and roll coverage under the sun and have been on teams that might call it different things, but they can quickly take a chunk of information and connect it to and apply it to this novel situation. So that led me to a lot of reading and a lot of discussion with my friends, some clinics that we created and tried to engage with across different sports. And really where I landed is I think the right answer is, or the best answer I've got to this point, is trying to make a conceptual roadmap of the sport, and within your own team's terminology, create a full picture of how these ideas can be chunked into bite-sized pieces. And so that you can be intentional in the way that you schedule, be intentional in the way that you're creating opportunities to get feedback on how players are progressing, and benefit from the desirable difficulties that are a part of any season already. Games are spaced. They are quizzes. They have information that is interleaved within them. If we reflect on them appropriately and we aren't a victim of our own recency bias by we gave up 15 offensive rebounds last night, so tomorrow is all about defensive rebounding. That, of course, is tempting, but by using sort of a broader conceptual roadmap of the sport, I think it offers the opportunity to schedule strategically, schedule in advance, maybe you can only design 30% of your practices a week from now or a month from now, but that's 30% of practice you don't have to plan a month from now. And it's a way to hold yourself accountable to things you know are important long-term, and not get caught up in the urgency of something that isn't actually that important. It just feels important because it's something that is happening today. So if I could, this is that sort of concept. The Eisenhower Matrix is what I've heard it called in classic American style. I suspect that there's no chance General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first one to implement it, but America. So there you go. I call it the urgent versus important matrix. It's like the things that feel urgent to us are going to get attention, and whether or not they're important. And the things that we know are important but aren't urgent, I think oftentimes is the area that we don't put enough time into. And so in preparation for my season in Sydney, which is not eventuated, almost all of our work this off season was focused on trying to plan in a way that reflected where we thought the highest leverage opportunities were for us to focus on. And one of those opportunities was to take advantage of some of the consistency and the benefits of having some of our players returning, while also interacting with our new players and not only supporting them to try to catch up in the ways that they hadn't experienced things from last year, but maybe even worse is like assuming that the players from last year are at a certain point just because they were on the team, and not accounting for the fact that they might not deeply understand at a mastery level some of the concepts we were working on throughout last season, because we weren't great teachers, because we didn't do as good a job, because we weren't tracking ourselves, we weren't getting feedback, we weren't doing routine assessments to get information back as coaches of how our players were progressing in terms of their understanding. And so that soliloquy, which I hope you'll forgive the length of, I suspect the energy behind it indicates how important I think this is, and just how much room we have to grow as coaches, me in particular, in understanding what opportunities exist for modern teaching benefiting our sport.
Great, thank
you. Ideas? My pleasure. Everyone, thank you so much. I'd be happy to talk about that for hours. Any other things, Marcus?
I'd have a follow-up question, and then we just got another question pop in. So how do you decide what elements are your important, not urgent parts that you want to work on? Like I think that's important to identify the different quadrants, and the hard thing I always find is to try and prioritize and then say, okay, what is really important, and that might not be urgent right now, but that we need to work on.
Brett Brown used a big whiteboard on his wall that at the top of which was written WMI, and he just had it circled. And for a long time, the thing high, he had like needed a step stool to get there. He wrote Joel. in big capital letters. And Joel Embiid was at the top of that list for a long time. And what's interesting is, like, even before Joel joined us, the idea of Joel was at the top of that list. Finding a Joel was the thing that was most important. And so it was a reminder to him, and it had other tiers of information below it, but if there was time to spare, it should be pointed towards those things. If you hadn't touched on that thing yet today, you're probably messing up. And the ability for us as a staff, you know, I don't think that communicated an outsized, like the way that I just framed it might suggest that Joel's importance was so much more than the other players on our team that could create a negative dynamic. And maybe that played out at different times. But what helped me working for the 76ers was understanding that we had a North Star. Our North Star was finding a franchise player. And until we had done that, we were going to be striving in everything we did to get one. And the reason why is because you can't win without one, and you really can't win at all without two. And you don't get a second one until you've got the first. And the way you get the first is usually you draft them. And so that helped every day, knowing that we had a mission, and our mission was to try to help our players grow and become either stars themselves or provide us the potential to trade potentially for a star, maybe the first one, maybe the second one. That kind of ethos really was a nice place to work. And so the key, I think, is hiring people and working with people that can, first of all, be disciplined enough to say, gosh, it feels like I want to work on defensive rebounding today, but the next 4 teams we play are all tiny and we're not going to have this issue. And it doesn't, I don't know that that's really the most important use of our time anyway. Maybe this is a chance to connect with someone who particularly got abused on the glass last night and let them know that we appreciate when they do box out, and we know they usually do, or, you know, there's an opportunity to zoom out and have what feels like it's urgent connect back to something that you know is in service to your future selves. And it's difficult. And so that's where I say creating safeguards, mostly by hiring and working with people that are smarter and more even keeled and steady than yourself, has been the best I've seen it happen. You said another one jumped in?
Yeah, thanks. Simon has a question.
Yes. Hi, Will. Thanks for being here. I'd like to know how you approach to players when you first get assigned to them, when you start like in training camp, and how do you identify on which part of their game you're going to work with them? Is it like a conversation from both sides? So how do you do that?
I have my own again, kind of hacks that I've found successful, which I'm happy to share. But the spirit around it is, how are you doing? I'm Will. Like, who are you? Like, why are you here? Here's why I'm here. Where are you headed? How can I help? Who's helped you before? Who have you hated working with? What thing is going to drive you crazy? What thing can I do that you'll really appreciate? Having a curiosity of learning about where they're from and what their family's like, and how this part of their life fits into a bigger picture. Those are things that I've found successful, not just with players, but with my friends and colleagues. And so that's the approach I take, mostly to just make it clear that, like, I'm not eager for my relationships to be merely about business. I understand if some are, and that's okay. And if they are more focused on that, that's fine. But understanding that at the onset is important to me. I'm not doing my work in order to maximize my earning, but I understand that at different times in people's careers, that might be why they're doing their work at that time. And I think we all, in a dream world, it's easy to imagine that we grow very cohesive and we understand completely and we're upfront and honest in our communication. And that's of course dreamy, but maybe I'll give you an example on the other side with a player that was more focused on maximizing their earning potential. It was like, great, like I want to help, like I want you to be rich. And by the way, like I want you to be rich so I can keep living by the beach in Sydney. Like I would really like to continue. I want my son to eat all the sand in all the beaches in Sydney. He's a 2-year-old for the record. He's not 27. That is going to be good for me and my family. And so when I go to sleep, you know what I'm gonna be thinking about? How to help you play well. And if you ever think I'm doing something that's not pointed towards that, say so. And by the way, you got to give me permission to point out when I think you're doing things that aren't pointed towards you earning that kind of money. So here's the investment thesis that we signed you under. We think that you're a switchable, defensive focused player that can make shots. That's how the market thinks of you. And let's work together to try to prove that to the market or reinforce that to the market or show the world that actually I'm also a player that can handle, or I'm also a player that is a great screener, or whatever it is that you think is going to maximize your earnings. Sweet. That's the paradigm I'm in. How can I be a part of that? That's how I've found the most success in working with players that maybe aren't as interested in me as a person in their story. It's a more romantic idea of what coaching can look like. But I like to start there, because if it is, and it has been many times, that's the most special opportunity. You never want to let that opportunity pass. Like you never want to miss the chance to connect with someone that, Matthew Dellavedova is now a person that I think of as a very close friend that I think will be that way forever. And that started in 2014, working to try to beat France or whoever we were playing in that game, and trying to understand why him being a part of that campaign was important to him.
Great, thank you for sharing this. Do you mind if I add one more question, Marcus?
Not at all, please.
Okay.
Marcus doesn't get to decide. I'm choosing. You may continue asking your great questions.
Okay. How do you design your one-on-one workouts? Like, do you add a lot of decision making in there, or do you do like to start with on a comfort and confidence stage by just taking repetition shots, and then you go a little further when it comes to complexity in your workouts?
More and more the former. I have now grown to distrust comfort in almost every part of training. And
okay.
The way our team schedules were organized, we were trying to space concepts out throughout practice, across the week, across a month. We were trying to interleave the work that we were doing in ways that players couldn't go on autopilot. They had to jump from thing to thing. And we were trying to work at the edge of our ability level throughout. And that meant we were putting just lots of decisions into games. We were using constraints to try to reinforce those principles. And very often our players there was a great deal of cognitive load attached to our training sessions over the last several months in Sydney. And I was extremely proud of it and excited about it. And I think it's going to pay off in big ways for the Sydney Kings moving forward. And it's the kind of thing that I hope someday to institute in the NBA, to try to grow a program that is creating as many opportunities to grow as possible. And that means, just like the weight room, adding weight, adding vectors, not just training in the sagittal plane with very, very little resistance, and not just doing the same kinds of exercises or drills or ways of teaching, so that it becomes, your body adapts. That's what we are. We're learning machines. And so I haven't seen a training session, I haven't conducted or been a part of a training session yet that I thought was variable enough or had as much decision making in it as I wished it had.
All right, thanks for sharing that as well. Helped a lot.
So how are we doing on time, just broadly, Marcus? Should we pivot or speed up or slow down?
On time, we're just close to an hour now. We've got one more question that's open in the chat, so we can. I guess we go for that question, and then you can continue with the presentation. So that's the questions from Rabia, Razvan.
Okay, so I have a question on the slide you had before about the positive mindset. So do you use psychologists to help to get you players into a positive mindset? Because I can imagine that, I mean, it's not only a competition also within the team, but you have the social media. It's super toxic in some ways with the social media comments that are made on how the players perform in the games. And so what do you do to have a positive mindset?
Oh, such a great question, and I don't have great answers. But I think to prove that I feel the same way, one of the ideas that stuck with me from all the clinics I've seen in my life came from Mick Cronin, who's the head coach of UCLA now. This is when he coached at University of Cincinnati. He identified something that's very true, I think, and sad, that when you get on the bus after every game, every player on the bus, except maybe one, the player with the most points, is receiving a number of text messages and reading Instagram, particularly the case in the NBA, but I think across sport now, collegiately, professionally, high school, everywhere, that is eating away at your team's ability to work for the betterment of the team. And sometimes it's coming from girlfriends or boyfriends, sometimes it's coming from agents, sometimes it's coming from media members, but many of those messages are, coach is screwing you. Your greatness is being obscured by, coach doesn't like you. This isn't what you were recruited there to do. This player is getting opportunities that you're not getting. So how to fight against that actively is very difficult. But one of the things that I share with teams early on when I work with them is how important it is to me to identify that as a reality of the current landscape and help each other recognize it when it happens. And so I think there's a lot of pride to be had. We did this in the G League. I think this is the first day we got together as a team. I said, we're playing in the most selfish league of basketball that has ever existed on planet Earth. And that means that there's a remarkable opportunity for us to stand out in ways that people won't expect us to. So if you post about our team, I would like for you to include a teammate as the center of that post as often as you can. And it would be easier for us to do that if someone else was posting something nice about you. And the quality of people we had on that team and the intellect we had on that team meant that they recognized, you know what, if I say nice stuff about a teammate, people will believe it. If I just say nice stuff about myself, everybody's going to say he's a dickhead. And so we actually had the opportunity as a team. I told them, I'm never going to tell the media something negative about you guys. Never. Like, I'm never going to go to the media and say this player isn't performing. I'm going to go to the media and say this player is working his butt off. This player kicked it out of bounds, but guess what? He got there. He got to the rim. He did what we were asking him to do. I back him to do it again next time, and I bet he scores. And so building that trust within the group is the only way I know to try to inoculate ourselves to those really toxic influences like you laid out. And I would love to work with psychologists. I have looked hard to find psychologists that can help me become a better coach and help our athletes. And I've worked with a couple who've done that. But I believe that this is an edge of the future. And I can't wait to find the people that are eager to work with me someday towards doing these things well, but I haven't found those people yet. Cool.
Thanks, Will. Let's carry on.
Yeah. If you're up with it, Marcus, I think I'll go quicker in hope that someone will stop me if we find something interesting.
Yep, let's do that.
Cool.
That's a good
All right.
plan.
So, you know, big picture wise, we've done physical, now we're doing mental. Just the idea of like what's next. This is a sort of sports psych concept, right? It's just like, what can we control? I hate the jingoistic special forces, Navy SEALs fetish, but the idea that like their job is what's next. Like anyone's job is just what's next. What can I do that's coming that's next? That's a spirit I like to inject into teams and try to hold myself accountable to as well. Concepts versus rules. All rookies suck at defense. Lots of veterans are good at defense. I think most of that comes from them making 1,000 micro decisions on every possession that are based in them learning these patterns over time. And I think creating too many rules or rules that are too strict let people turn their brains off and stop figuring out, I need to be right here, right now, so that I'm ready for what's next, as opposed to, oh, when the ball's on the wing, I'm supposed to be in the passing lane, as opposed to understanding who I'm guarding, who am I, who has the ball, who's guarding the ball, how likely is he to get blown by. So in general, I try to default more towards away from rules wherever possible, to try to grow over a season and over many seasons. And then explain, just being humble enough to be like, this is why we think this is what we spend our time on. And if you understand what we're trying to achieve, then it gives you a better opportunity to achieve that. And if you found a flaw in our logic, I'd like you to bring it to our attention so that we can change our processes and get better. But we're striving for championship basketball on every possession. A high school coach that I really respect in Texas has that as his kind of program motto. And I think that's right, is that we're trying to be process oriented. We're trying to find the approach that minimizes how many points are going to get scored against us on the next possession and maximizes the number of points that we're going to score on the following possession, all the way up until the very end of the game where variance comes into play and it's less about expected value. And like, but most of the time we're doing that. And that means that like, what should I be doing next? You should be focused on helping us score points and trusting that that means you're going to score more points as an individual as well. Checklists. One book I really enjoy recommending as a tool Gawande's Checklist Manifesto, just understanding the power of automating some of these decisions when possible and helping people move down a curve of understanding. I really believe in that. Different kinds of ways to change your training from maybe what it was like when you were a player. Less lecture, less team film, more video. We sent video clips to our players via WhatsApp every night, short hits. Khan Academy is kind of the inspiration, but I'm watching it and I don't understand. I rewind it. I'm watching it. I still don't understand. I rewind it. Oh, got it. Like those moments is what we're trying to find, help our players find. And it brings the added benefit of it gives you another opportunity for not only recall practice, but spacing out the information you're giving them across a day, across a week. You don't only have a morning training session, you also have an evening opportunity to watch and learn, and opportunities even to quiz and ask questions within that video. More gamification, more recall practice in every way we possibly can, like that, those kinds of things underpin our mental approach. So one skill acquisition person I worked with had a really, I think, important question, which is like, what is the point of everything? What is the point of this drill, this day, this section of the season? If you can answer that question, then it's probably worth doing. But oftentimes you just do, okay, we got to do closeouts today. Why? Like, what are we going to do? What is the point of this closeout drill? That has been hugely influential to me and is something that I want our players to understand also, so that they feel connected to the relevancy of everything that we're doing. And as you can see here, the difference between and the benefits of these different kinds of practice, I think helping understand the question the coach asked earlier about confidence and rhythm. Is that important? Sure. Does it get too much attention in terms of how many minutes we devote to it? Yes. If we care about improving performance, we need to be more on this other end. And that doesn't mean that it can't also have elements of free play, but it does mean that when our players shot 5 shots, 5 spots, we called that confident shooting, because that's what it was. It wasn't about improving their shooting, and helping define that for players and help them understand the evidence for why we believe that is important, I think. I'll play this clip and then we can talk about it. This is one of the world's great pianists of all time. So that's a clip of him performing at a concert. And now, before we listen to him practice, I'd just like everybody to try to think about and identify ways that this can translate onto a basketball court. And I grant you, this might be the least compelling example a basketball coach could bring to bear on this discussion. So I can't wait for someone to find less nerdy options for me in the future, but this is what I got so far, and the example is so good, I think you'll grant me at the end of it that there's some things to be learned. So I think very often we think experts just go through things once quickly and they're done and they're good, right? And of course the truth is that's couldn't be farther from the truth. So playing it faster than the performance, chunking it into bits, recognizing, self-regulating that bit isn't right, repeating it, figuring out, okay, what was I messing up? Slowing down to really isolate that moment. Then putting it back into the bigger picture and connecting the phrases, all of those things I think I can easily, I don't think are oftentimes done on the basketball court. And I can see the value of all those same approaches being brought into a skill session or a team training session. But in some ways, it's just understanding and giving guys permission to practice in a different way, particularly a way that doesn't have any performative elements. Like, I'm not performing for anyone right now. I'm not trying to look good during this section of practice. In fact, I'm trying to make mistakes. Like, I'm trying to find ways to grow in this session. And that, I think, is what experts do better than the rest of us. And I think this is a great example in a basketball idiom. This is about as close of a thing to deliberate practice as you could ever hope to find. Paul George, James Harden, and Kevin Durant playing one-on-one against each other. And the way that, you know, they are watching each other intently, the level of focus they have to have because of how good each of them are, the opportunity from these different spots to experiment and play and work at the edge of their ability, I find compelling and motivating in bunches of ways. And maybe the best part about it is there's just no coaches involved, that this is like skaters or surfers. They are watching each other and saying, how did you do that? And there's a segment, and I won't play the whole thing because it's relatively long, but there's a segment in here where they start, one of them hits a particularly ridiculous step back and they all start copying him and they all try to do it to each other, even knowing that the other person knows they're about to do it. And they're finding ways, just like that concert pianist, to make it harder than it is at a game and grow. And they don't care these people are watching. They're enjoying competing, and they've found a space that they can do this that I believe is part of why they are great and how they got to be great, is feeling that step back and then trying it themselves. So that kind of connects to like the third part of it, you know, body, mind, spirit. Like I hope basketball can be fun. Like, I hope that we can, in our warm-ups, in our long schedule, that we all love routine, that we don't drift into monotony, that we don't drift into these tropes of what how hard work it's supposed to be, and lose sight of the fact that this can be a blast. So the degree to which learning and basketball and competing are fun, it's important to keep your eye on that. And it's to remember that, like, oftentimes we're the ones that screw that up. So trying not to be that, trying to stay out of the way, trying to create patterns and systems that are positively cyclical in and of themselves is important to me. And how you do that through changing up your schedule, what we did with our players, even in traditionally very uncool ways. Like, we took our players, the 76ers, to the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and Neil deGrasse Tyson sat with our players and had a lecture about astronomy and cosmology, and our players asked the best questions you could ever imagine, and we all learned so much, and we all pointed to it again and again. The Nets, we did a camp in Los Angeles that was very difficult and had a lot of rigor to it physically, and we had a surfing lesson at the end, and we had individual dinners with small groups so that we could really get to know each other in a real way, rather than some stodgy, long group affair that feels formal. We tried to take our players, the Kings, to one of the best boxers in Sydney and learn from him and box with each other and feel what that training looks like. We did escape rooms, which the players did it on their own, to try to understand, like, how they can, some people lead, some people follow. We're trying to figure out puzzles in a game. How do we do that through collaboration? And I think maybe the most impactful way for me was the games that our players would play, the ways that we warmed up, the ways that we began training. This was all overseen by our performance director, Toby Banfield, Alex Marich, former great EuroLeague stars there in the middle, helping us, jogging to get cones out of the way. But even inside of what we're doing in a normally boring, and when I was younger, this was like we sit in a circle and stretch. Like, this didn't have anybody playing games or competing against each other. We definitely weren't playing ultimate frisbee. But this was something that started every day with a spirit of fun, a spirit of competition. And it's probably the favorite thing our players did. And our coaches loved it too. We did this after losses. We did this before playoff games. This is a part of who we were in Sydney. And a lot of that was because of the people we had there. And I took some cues from them, but I would look to try to find ways to institute these ideas anywhere I went. And by the way, like, it's using a clever, knowing how people's brains work. It's like the beginning and end of things we remember. All this stuff in the middle of this presentation, very few of you will remember, and that's cool. Like, I'm trying to start well and finish well, because that will mean that you guys generally have a positive impression. And that same kind of thing in practices can help your guys feel like this is worthwhile and this is enjoyable. And so these are some of the activities that we did throughout the season. This was an annual plan of a football team in Sydney, the Sydney FC, that we stole as an idea for how we structured our annual plan the following season. And so we just copied it as a format, and it gave it all to our players, and they gave it to their wives, and they knew what days we were going to be off, and they knew that it was subject to change, but broadly it helped them plan their year. And as often as possible, we were trying to inject these non-traditional ways to reinforce what we were trying to achieve into our work, because we enjoyed it. And that's a big part of what I'll remember when I leave there. And I think it's the same for our other guys. So last little section is just about sort of the how we do individual development plans. But before I do that, anybody have any ways they'd like to take this instead? I suppose we have about 30 minutes left.
We've got a question from Matthias. So,
Marcus, I don't have you.
Oh, can you hear me? Hello? Razvan, can you hear me?
Maybe it's me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Matthias has a question.
Could be me.
It's Matthias.
That might make it challenging.
So, do you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, hello?
No, scheint nicht so zu sein.
Okay.
Can you hear us now, Will?
Gotcha. Yep, I'm back.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. Matthias, leg los.
So, I just have a question. Up from what age you get in contact with players? So, when does that? It's a wide range you're dealing with.
Very wide. Yeah, I suppose the youngest I've worked with since I've coached professionally has been 18, but most players are at the very lowest 20, 21, 22. And on the high end, the Luis Scolas and David Andersons and Andrew Bogut's of the world, you know, approaching 40.
Okay. So that's my second question would be, you have a player and you see, I mean, you have a player who is a star.
That means a lot of the hard work is done already.
Of course, but he gets in let's say a mood where he just loses kind of a little bit of balance in his shooting and whatsoever, but he doesn't accept. So or you get in what I'm interested in. How do you get access to those kind of players? Just to open them up, to open their minds, to set them in a kind of a curiosity there, to awake their curiosity.
I don't know. I think there's surely not a silver bullet for that. And so the model that I would pursue is connected to my efforts to be authentic in my communication with everyone I work with and everyone in my life. The things that come to mind as things I would try, one, I hope that we've created an environment, like filled up the environment with people that sense that and are care enough and are brave enough to try to connect. And I hope I'm one of them. And so I'm a big fan of like, hey, did I screw something up? Like what's going on? Did I mess? I feel like I messed something up. Your energy is different, like whatever it is, just engaging and trying to understand am I off base? What do you even recognize that your behaviors are changing? And being brave enough and forthright enough to say, yeah, your body language is all messed up. Like the whole gym thinks you're screwed up right now. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's my perspective and you set me right. That I think is important. I hope that there's other folks doing the same kind of thing because they care about the performance of our team. And whether it's a star player or a player that doesn't play much, that kind of impact can be a big drag on our efficiency and our ability to perform. I think that the ways that the frequency that you communicate is very important. And so if you haven't had if you don't create regular opportunities to check in, that means that things can fester and linger over time. And so trying to make it not just something you try to do, I want to keep in good contact with everyone on our team, but it's like, no, there are ways that whether we need to or not, we're going to communicate regularly. And sometimes that's a calendar, sometimes that's just the way the day is set up. But that sometimes gives you an opportunity to deal with something before it becomes a crisis or before it's something that has broken your trust. And I think also recognizing that like very few things are permanent. And the answer that I've seen very good coaches better than me, their gift oftentimes is ignoring it for some period of time and giving it an opportunity to correct somehow and not feeling like I must correct this all the time because one, no one can correct everything all the time. And two, that Aaron Bain said it best at one point, nothing makes you more pissed off when you're pissed off than someone telling you to calm down. So it's okay for people to have a shitty mood and have a bad feeling and whatever it is, like that's okay. That's part of it. Like what's not okay is the performance of the team to suffer. And it's not okay for any of us to allow our teammates, if we all care about this, to affect the performance of the team. And then that allows, I think, for a communication framework to where we can say it's affecting our performance in the following ways. Like I'm not good with this part and I want to help. Like, what can I do to help that? And they can say, it's not affecting the performance. You say, oh, here it is. This is how it's affecting performance. But that to me allows for the opportunity to mend some of those fences and deal with people being people. And not all those problems will have solutions, but that's sort of a multi-layered approach at how I've seen those kinds of things improve. So very quickly, I'll walk you through just like a couple development plans, and again, I'll try to make you stop me with how quick I'll go. So this was an actual plan we used for one of our players, Daniel Kickert, a player who had had great success in Europe, and it was a very veteran, entering the tail end of his career. And so we were trying to help. Came about, this presentation, as a result of many conversations with him, the assistant coach he was working with, and me. And we wanted to codify it and put it in writing so that we had a roadmap and that we could refer back to it and change it over time as circumstance required. So offensively, we wanted to focus on make them pick their poison, make people guard you. The deeper threes you take, the more people have to guard you out there, the more space there is for others. That means getting uncomfortable with how aggressive we want you to be as a shooter. And if you pick and pop, that has obvious benefits. If you roll, that's great. We want you to get out after you roll to recreate that space for us. This is what he had shot previously before we worked with him, to try to give him a sense of where he'd been effective. And over time, we were trying to push more attempts out of every shot other than the three, quite frankly, with Dan, which is a different approach and one that he hadn't felt before from coaches. So here's him trailing into the play. Like, this is a perfect example of the kind of shot we were encouraging him to shoot. And we were constantly showing him and praising examples of him shooting these shots that didn't go in. It was very important to us that he know we meant it. So that shot there is a great example of what we were after. By doing it that way, it created tons of space for others and put a lot of pressure on defenses. And when he saw these examples, he realized the power of how this shooting could totally change the offensive profile of our team. So these are examples we've obviously pulled after the season, the success he's had, but this is a clip that we would get on Dan about after a game that isn't in keeping with where we thought he could be successful. And it's the kind of play he's used to making and that I think many coaches would encourage. But I think it's this one. Oh, we've moved on to Didi's clips, my bad. Him shot faking and driving to the basket was not something that we thought over time was going to benefit us as a team. And that meant that he needed to catch it farther away from the hoop. And it meant that he needed to trust that if he missed these shots, that we were going to support him. But this is a shot for Dan Kickert in our view. And the challenge for us with him was getting him to believe us that we wanted him to shoot as many of these as he could find in a game. I recognize that's very often not the issue with players, is trying to get them to shoot deeper, more difficult, more contested, earlier jump shots. But it was a fun puzzle because of the uniqueness of it, and making him understand that shot as compared to this shot was going to be much higher value for us as a team, not only because of how often it went in, but because of how it was going to make defenses guard him. In contrast, we had a very young player whose main focus for us, this is Didi Luzada, was preparing him for his first season as a rookie in the NBA, whenever that was going to come, and trying to find ways that it made clear to him that we were going to organize things in a way that was going to work well for him. So this was just his preseason shot profile, which is when we sat with him to do this meeting. But we're really focused on driving kick, like how well can you finish, how little can you settle, particularly early in shot clocks, and how many of those chances where you don't settle can be converted into three-point attempts for you. Pass it, relocate out behind the three, let someone else reward you with an easier shot. And these are the opportunities that he was able to develop over the course of the year. becoming a better finisher, working particularly on his left hand. That was an area of real focus for us because he wasn't comfortable using his left hand, and showing him all the opportunities that he left on the table early, and then how that changed as the year went on. These games against Melbourne are in the playoffs and the finals. The games early on were some of the first games of our regular season, and the growth he showed in this area is a direct reflection of the growth he had as a player and the work that people poured into him over the course of the year. But with 2 minutes on the line and a decisive playoff game, he is punishing their 5-man and finishing at the basket in ways that he never would have considered early in the season. Those were oftentimes turning into pull-up jumpers that, when I sat with him early on, I helped him understand that the head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans is not going to be excited about his rookie wing choosing to shoot these shots instead of throwing it to Drew Holiday or Zion Williamson or one of these other great players that you're going to be alongside. And so being frank in that way, I think, built trust between me and Gigi. And he bought in a way because of that trust that helped him have a great season. And I think led to him returning to Sydney for another year because he felt like he could develop and grow from that experience. So this is the sort of physical plan we came up with for Gigi to really try to make it clear to him that so much of his work was about the next 15 years of his career, and appreciate what a full-time job being a pro basketball player is. So this is his day, and besides Wednesday and Sunday, it's pretty full. And that was as much a focus of our development for him, and reflects, I think, my belief in the way I've spoken about kind of the holistic nature of these things when they go well, that this isn't a 9 to 10, 9 to 12, 9 to 1 kind of job. Lastly, I think this is a slide that I actually showed. I just pulled this directly from when I was interviewing with the team to make it clear to our ownership that was new in owning a team just how difficult it is to win and develop, and identify the tension between those ideas, because those were the two things they were most focused on. And so we were going to try to achieve both, but players improve through reps, and a lot of those reps come in minutes, and those are at a premium if we're prioritizing winning. So how we deal with the fact that we're going to have modern science impact the way that we train, and that we're going to need great, diligent coaches that are going to institute these modern training techniques to help players grow. We're going to need facilities available to support those kind of things. The uniqueness nature of our league and how few roster spots there are means that we needed to find staff that were capable of understanding and minimizing our risk profile for all these athletes, while also discussing and being open about, as a program, the kind of risk tolerance we had with each signing, and appreciating that you don't get rewarded much if you don't risk much, but that if winning and developing players were our two most important guiding principle North Stars, then all of our hires, all of our signings needed to reflect that. And that's not simple, but if we kept it top of mind, we felt like we could achieve what we were after. And a big part of achieving that was meaning that sometimes we were going to sacrifice a little bit our chances of winning, or sacrifice a little bit our chances of a player developing for a day or a week. But as long as we were intentional about it and never lost track, we could, over time, increase the odds of both as we built our program. And that is the end of me droning on.
It's great hearing some of your thoughts, and we've got 2 questions left in the chat, so I think that'll be a good point to round it all up. We'll start with Maxi. Razvan, can you get Maxi's mic?
Thanks. First of all, yeah, thanks. And second, I got a question about player development. You said your last player, Luzado, I believe it was the name, the rookie. And obviously in the G League, or maybe with your Sydney team, you develop the player for the NBA. But when you go to college basketball, you may have to pick some players you put in more work with and others you say maybe they can't go to the next level. And in which points do you use to pick your players? Do you to put more work with, and do you look what do they need to compete at the next school year, or do you look at what they need to, what kind of skill set do they need to have on the highest level, like the NBA or in the EuroLeague?
I think that's a real puzzle, in particular because of just the decisions that we make oftentimes as a coach or a program have massive ramifications for these human beings' lives. And very often our self-images are tied up in our identities as players or coaches or members of a team. And so I start by appreciating that and trying to honor that in the way that we make those decisions and communicate about those decisions. I also bring a level of, you could call it humility, but it's really just like appreciating how bad we are at predicting things. So my certainty around what level this player will get to is not typically very high. It's usually pretty wide, my confidence interval on those kinds of things. So players, you still need to make decisions and you still need to operate, but when possible, moving the spotlight around from the either or, do we spend time with this player or this player, and instead trying to find solutions that have the opportunity to be and. Can we create a setting in which these players, as an example, can both benefit, or they all can benefit, and not just get tricked into thinking that every decision is zero sum, either or. He benefits and he loses, or she's struggling and she's succeeding. One effective way that I've seen that happen is in Brooklyn. We had a low minutes group, and the truth of an NBA season is it's long enough, injuries are common enough, that for most of the players, they're going to dip in and out of the rotation. Like a large set of players are going to be in that boat. And if they care about their careers, they're going to want to continue to improve. And it's going to be difficult for them to improve without meaningful game minutes. So we tried to create playing environments for them. Instead of shoot-arounds, we had those guys going to the gym early before a team meeting or after a team meeting. And different people were a part of it at different times. Sometimes it was the veteran player that had fallen out of favor and was on the last year of his contract, and it is what it is. And sometimes it was the rookie that hadn't yet gotten into the rotation and found his footing and was trying to grow in all these ways he needed to grow. Sometimes it was someone coming back from injury or someone who just got injured. Turning that into the most fun thing we did in Brooklyn was a stroke of brilliance by Jock Vaughn and Adam Harrington and Brett Brielmeyer and Jordan Ott and Trayvon Bryant and the guys that built that. And I loved being a part of it. And sometimes it was 3-on-3 versus the coaches. Sometimes it was shooting games, everyone competing against each other. Other times it was these two guys playing one-on-one because it's their return to play protocol, and these other guys getting really high quality skill work in. But we had music playing loud every time. We were cracking jokes throughout the whole thing, and it became cool. It became a cool thing to be a part of, even though it meant you weren't playing or succeeding nominally. And so that's an example, I think, of how a system can support not only the individuals that are part of it, but a broader spirit in your team that is conducive to performance. And when there's hard decisions to make, like the ones you've just talked about, the only answer I know is just being candid and explaining that I'm not certain of this, but this is why we're doing this at this time. We're choosing that you're not in the rotation currently, and until something changes, that's how it's going to be. That's hard to have those conversations, and it's hard for those players to hear that. But I believe that in the absence of that kind of communication, you run a serious risk of dropping into a vicious cycle with your players and a negative feedback loop. And your program runs the risk of being the type of program where players don't feel like they were given the respect of having that information communicated to them. Same with agents or parents, depending on the cohorts you're dealing with.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Maxi. And to finish off, we've got one last question from Philip.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So my question is the mentality thing. So every player in a team has a certain role, and you will always have the kid that is good, but he isn't taking like the leader role. He isn't speaking practice. He isn't speaking huddles and things like that. How do you create an understanding from the player what you expect from him, and how, in a certain way, how do you bring him in that role? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. I think I understand. I'll try to answer, and it won't be very good because I think it's a very difficult thing to solve. But I suppose the first place I'd start is making sure it is a problem, like making sure it is something that needs to be solved. If it feels like one to you, it probably is. But I certainly have grown in my understanding of how different people are and how successful players can be, and coaches can be for that matter. I feel like I'm proof that don't necessarily communicate in the same way as others, or maybe the classical archetypal examples that we have in our head. That being said, you do need players to communicate, and it is a lot easier if your best players are willing to communicate. I think it's also important for your nominally worst players to communicate, because that is powerfully symbolic. It's symbolically powerful as well. In terms of ways to encourage that, the best I've been able to find through experimentation is less full group work, smaller groups throughout. The opportunity and the pressure that comes from those settings, you can't fade into the background as easily. Identifying it as a work on part of your priority. This was the case with Kevin Lish and last year's development plan for him. You are one of the most senior, one of the most veteran, one of the smartest, one of the most team-oriented players we have. We need the other players to benefit from that. So if you're just deferring to them because you're such a nice guy, you aren't doing your job as we see it, because the team performance is going to suffer as compared to how it would benefit from your contributions in this space. And like any development plan, this is how we're gonna have a daily checklist. We're gonna make you connect with the hardest player to connect with on our team on a routine basis. The Hawthorn Football Club in Australians Football League, they have a way to gamify the work that they do with their young players that gives them a list of items to check off, including taking an older player for a coffee to ask them about their career, seeking to try to be involved with an older player's development work after practice. And they all have points attached to them. And the player that gets to a certain threshold of points first receives some kind of bonus or some kind of party or some kind of other like silly benefit. I think that's eminently clever. Like, I think those kinds of ways to institute a behavior scavenger hunt for activities and ways to benefit is something that's really powerful. I've thought at one point, and we tried to institute the idea that like each player has a area that they're working on in their game and an area that they're working on away from the game, but connected to the team at all times, and that it's visible to all the other players. That takes a lot of trust, and it might mean you pick a certain topic. You might not get into the really pointy, nitty-gritty stuff. If someone really does have a fear of speaking in public or those kinds of things, or a really challenging part of their game, for instance, to stop being such a selfish pig, right? Probably can't be written in their locker. But I think there's real power to that. The idea that like we're all working on stuff. And by the way, like here's the coaches ones. I'm trying to become more succinct in my communication. I'm working to understand pressing defense better. Those are mine. If you can help me get better at those, I'd appreciate the feedback. there's opportunities, I think, to reinforce a growth mindset, even in something like a soft skill, like the one you just identified.
Thanks a lot, Will. Those were some really insightful answers. And even though you kept saying that you weren't sure that you had the right answer, I thought you gave us at least a bit of a, how do you say, a bit of a guide. And yeah, I've written a lot of notes. So appreciate you giving up your time, most of all, but also your experience and thoughts and ideas on a lot of these topics. And hope you enjoyed it as well.
I love the question. I love the chance to connect with you guys. I have a ton of respect for German basketball. My friends, Chris Fleming and Martin Schiller, and you, of course, are some of the best coaches on earth. And I've stolen and benefited in all sorts of ways from y'all's wisdom. And I hope the world will organize itself sooner rather than later to where I can visit and you all can visit here. And I would love the chance to host you if I ever have the chance. And I'll also make sure to pass along just where some of these ideas came from in terms of a reading list and some other things that hopefully keep the conversation going with anybody that's interested.
Perfect. That would be great. Yeah, because we provide all the notes and everything on our website. So
great.
Anything you can share would be
my pleasure.
Great.
Thank you again for everything. Appreciate your time.
No worries. I know you have to run. You got lots of stuff to do, so we'll let you go, and we'll finish off with the rest of the guys here.
Thank you so much.
Have a good time.
Bye.
Thanks, mate. See ya. So, und bevor alle anderen abhauen, noch abschließend möchte ich euch dieses Bild teilen. Das war die letzte Coach-Klinik für dieses Jahr und wir hatten viele Referenten, ein paar sind vielleicht auch noch dabei, deswegen möchte ich jetzt auch offiziell alle danken, die referiert haben, die teilgenommen haben. Und ihr seht ja hier ein paar Bilder. Möchte gleichzeitig euch auch danken, dass ihr alle teilgenommen habt. Hoffe, dass wir euch auch weiter dabei haben können. Wenn ihr Ideen, Feedback habt zu unserer Coach-Klinik, dann schreibt uns bitte. Unsere Kontaktdaten findet ihr auf der Homepage. Und ja, wir freuen uns, wenn wir Feedback kriegen und die Sache noch interessanter, noch besser für euch gestalten können. Und abschließend wollte ich an Razvan weitergeben. Passe ich den Ball weiter, weil er sagt euch, wie es nächstes Jahr weitergeht.
Genau, danke Markus. Auch von meiner Seite aus, Dankeschön an alle, die da waren, die jetzt über schon ein paar Termine uns unterstützt haben, das Ganze am Leben zu halten und dass wir auch sehen, dass das Interesse da ist. Wie geht es weiter? Markus Bursch, den müssten wir kennen, der war ein paar Mal bei uns, wird uns am 11. über Hotspot Hüfte zeigen. Vielleicht ist es gut, nach den Ferien im athletischen Bereich was zu machen. Und danach haben wir jede Woche, bis der Lockdown zu Ende ist, werden wir etwas weitermachen. Also eine Coachklinik wird dann wieder montags um 19 Uhr stattfinden. Wir wünschen euch gesunde und erholsame Feiertage, einen guten Rutsch und hoffentlich in einem schöneren, besseren Jahr 2021.
Vielen Dank auch von meiner Seite. Frohe Weihnachten.